Hello and welcome. You are very welcome to join us today for this extra special launch event of Cleantech for Europe. My name is Jennifer Baker. I'm going to be your moderator today. We have some excellent speakers here to explain what Cleantech is all about, as well as panels. And so I do want you to get involved, ask your questions, use the hashtag Cleantech for Europe on social media. I'll be keeping an eye on it using my phone, and also keep an eye on what's happening on the live stream. There's going to be lots of comments and questions, and I hope this is going to be very engaging. I'm sure it will be. Now, one of the questions people often ask is, what is Cleantech? Why is it important? Why now? Well, of course, over recent years, we've seen a lot of policy decisions at EU level that have been leading us towards a greener future. But sometimes missed in this whole discussion is exactly what technologies can help to get us there. And so that is why there's this brand new initiative, Cleantech for Europe. It's launched with the support of Breakthrough Energy and 10 leading EU clean tech investors. So we're going to talk about that. There's also a little bit of limited cooperation between all the different actors involved. So what we want to do today as we start off this initiative is to foster that discussion, to bring people together with the same aims and work out how best to collaborate. This summit is the first in a series that's meant to be a forum of space for discussion, but a place also where EU policymakers can get the sorts of hands-on knowledge that they might not come across in their day-to-day policy lives from the leaders in this clean tech space. So do get involved. If you've got something to add, we really do want to hear from you. However, I am going to start off by handing over to the Vice President at Europe at Breakthrough Energy, and that is Anne Mettler. So Anne, I'm going to give the floor to you to enlighten our audience about what clean tech is all about.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer, and I'm very pleased to kick us off today. Before I start, let me please allow me to say a word about Breakthrough Energy. Because maybe not everyone is familiar. So Breakthrough Energy was founded in 2015 by Bill Gates to develop the innovations and the technologies that we need to lead the world to net zero emissions. And as you just said, I have the great pleasure and honor of leading the Europe operation. So I won't be long because I'm actually very eager to hear what Pascal Canfin, the next speaker, has to say. And I already want to thank him very much for being with us today. But there are 2 points I want to get across in my remarks today. So the first one is really a call to focus more squarely on the needs of scale-ups. Now, I'm old enough to remember that maybe 20, 25 years ago, Europe's big challenge was not enough startups. And when I started a company almost 20 years ago, it was by all accounts not an easy thing to do. So I know what I'm talking about. But this has completely changed. Europe today has a very vibrant startup ecosystem across the continent. And while I wouldn't attribute this entirely to policy, what I will say is that policy recognized the problems, both at member state level and at the EU level, and as a consequence, made it a priority to focus particularly on early stage funding. And it has paid off. You can see here, for instance, that in clean tech space, VC funding has multiplied by 7.5 times in 10 years. That's impressive. Now, however, we don't want our companies to always remain startups and to remain small, or to be sold prematurely, which is also often what happens. Which is why I really want to advocate for a greater focus on scale-ups, so that more mature companies that have already been on a steep growth curve can remain on that growth curve. And that doesn't happen often enough. Here, the picture actually looks quite different. Cleantech for Europe research shows that while Europe attracts 23% of global C-Tech funding, that goes down to less than 7% for scale-up funding. And that compares to 54% for the US or 5% for the UK. Remember, UK, one country, 5%. So I must say that I have never understood that. Companies that have already proven themselves, and as scale-ups have, deserve much more policy attention. They have proven that they have a successful business model. They have successfully raised funds. They operate, and if they operate in clean tech, we know that they have successfully innovated. So from a public policy perspective, it is really, in my opinion, a no-brainer to give scale-ups at least as much attention as we give startups. So this now brings me to my second point. We live in a world where political and economic influence is increasingly highly correlated with technology leadership. And that's as true in digital tech as it is in clean tech. But precisely because of this correlation, we must raise our game. It's not enough to be the world's regulator. We must also be the world's innovator. We know from the International Energy Agency said that some 50% of the additional emission reductions that will be needed to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 will have to come from technologies that are not yet commercialized. So really, we have our work cut out for us and ourselves. But let me also say that I think we are starting from quite a strong position. We have the ambitious net zero targets. We have real political momentum. We have real public acceptance for the energy transition. And for once, we also have the financial firepower to turn today's nascent technologies into the markets of the future. So Next Generation EU, the EU's recovery program, coupled with all of the national stimulus programs that have also been launched, really that kind of money represents a once in a generation opportunity to make Build Back Better more than just a slogan. We can actually do this now. So the points that I just highlighted around scale-ups, around funding, around innovation, technology, they have very much led to the creation of Cleantech for Europe, an initiative that focuses on the technology frontier, that focuses on scaling, on mainstreaming clean tech across our economies, and that seeks to be an open and vibrant meeting space, but also a provider of original content, maybe a catalyst for all those that are committed to building the next generation of clean technologies. It's what the climate needs, it's what Europe embraces, and that is what brings us all together here today. So thank you for being with us, and I'm just really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Anne. If I may, a couple of quick follow-up questions. I know you mentioned Build Back Better at a recent event I was doing with the Commissioner Maria Gabriel. She says we need to stop saying Build Back Better and start saying Build Forward Better. So looking to the future, you do have experience within the EU institutions. What do you think is the main lever point, if you like? What can we leverage right now to get this scale-up funding that we need?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, if I look at this, and for those of you who know me, know that I used to work very much in digital tech and now in clean tech. So if I look at clean tech, by all accounts, Europe is really in pole position to be successful. We're strong on research and science. We have world-leading industrial firms. We have political resolve to tackle climate change. And that is not to be underestimated, that we have this resolve if you look at how difficult many things are elsewhere in the world. So, however, it's clear to me that this is not only about policy or ambitious targets. It's Europe usually wants the right things. I mean, I think most of us can identify with many of Europe's targets and the strategies. But if I say one thing, it's much more about the implementation, about operationalizing what it is we say we want. We have ambitious 2030 targets. We have ambitious 2050 targets. How do we operationalize now? So what I have learned as well is that the challenge to success is often not only about technology itself. And there I can actually really speak from experience that when it comes to technology, I have a lot of confidence in Europe. But success in the clean tech space is also about the wider business environment. It's about the innovation ecosystem. How quickly, for instance, can companies scale across Europe? Is the single market working for these companies? Is there a liquid and well-functioning capital market? Really, with what ease can companies acquire permits or have access to the infrastructure that they need? So I understand at first glance, such questions, they may seem marginal, but I can assure you they are not. And this is why I think it's so important to sort of bring maybe those that design the regulations and the policy a little bit closer together with the clean tech community, because we need to build mutual understanding. And I know there are many from the clean tech community on this in this event. And I would say to those as well, please try to understand policymakers, because this is not an easy business that they're in. There are many constraints. This is not easy to do. So building this mutual understanding and seeing where are sort of the levers that we can leverage now to make Europe the global leader that we know we needed to be in the clean tech space. This is very much my hope, my ambition for clean tech for Europe.
Thank you very much, Anne. A great opening to our event. So thank you very much for that. And stay with us, of course. We may have questions for you coming in from our audience during the next couple of hours. I'll turn now to our next speaker. We are delighted and very honoured to have joining us the chair of the ENVI committee from the European Parliament. That's MEP Pascal Canfin. Pascal, great to have you here. I'm going to give you the floor to give us your take. Obviously, you've been following this area in great detail. So give us your take from the position of someone inside the European Parliament.
Well, thank you very much for your invitation. And as you can hear, I come from France. So you will have the pleasure to have the French accent in English. I hope it's a pleasure for you. I cannot agree more. I cannot agree more with what Anne said. I mean, I subscribe to all what was said, including the fact that's maybe the last comment you made, that we need to come closer from the clean tech community and the policymakers community. Because in our day-to-day operational way to design and to build policies, we are in very close touch with big corporates. That's what we call lobbying, and they know perfectly how to do it. And usually, these big companies are their business model rely on the technology of the past. And the technology of the future are less represented, either because they don't exist yet, or more and more because the core issue is scaling up, and precisely you can disrupt the existing players. And we need, so that's why we definitely need a better, more frequent dialogue in a context which is completely new and historic. Under the umbrella of the Green Deal, we are going to change more than 50 laws. From now on, we have already started, and some of them are already concluded, like the new climate law for Europe. And 50 laws will be changed from now on to the end of 2022. So in 2 years' time, we are going to change more than 50 laws. Keep that in mind, because when you change 50 laws at the same time, it starts becoming systemic. When you change at the same time rules for carbon pricing, for cars, for renewable energies, for carbon farming, for soil, and so on, you address all the key issues at the same time. And what is the theory of change behind? At least my theory of change is that I always have in mind a triangle. This triangle is made of 3 angles. The first one is citizens, consumers, investors' expectations. So the societal aspects, what is acceptable, what is desired by a vast majority of society, for instance, by the young generation. Second angle of the triangle is the technology. We can expect or desire everything we want. If we do not have the technologies to deliver, it's nice, but we will not make it happen. And the third angle is the rules of the game. You can have the best technology to be provided, the greenest technology. If there is a rule of the game which kills you, which does not allow you to develop, which doesn't price carbon, which and so on and so on and so on, then you have the nice technology, but it will remain marginal. It will not scale up, and it will not impact as it could have impact the change and delivering on our climate target, for instance. So I have always this triangle in mind, and my role as policymakers is to make sure that we have the good rules, the proper rules of the game in place. And that's exactly what we are doing with the Green Deal, changing more than 50 laws. I'm not going to elaborate on the 50 laws, of course, but I give you just one example or two examples. The first one is the carbon pricing. We are already in a world where, in Europe, sorry, not in the world, that's another issue, but in Europe, where carbon pricing now is 60 euros. Back a couple of months ago, it was 40. And back years ago, it was 20, 15, 5. And now at 60, and we all expect that it will stay at 60, maybe up to 65, 67, 80, we are in the space where the business models change. Because the profitability, when you factor that in, the profitability is very different for low carbon cement, low carbon steel, low carbon, highly carbon intensive technology. This switch is now open. This race is now open, which was not the case before. And that's where the clean techs are there. So it's a huge opportunity for you. It's a huge new market for these technologies that we are building, which is good, with this new set of rules. Another example is carbon farming. You know that we need to store carbon in our soil, in our forest, and so on. And there is new clean tech enabling us to scale it up, either on the data element or on the concrete injection of carbon. That's brand new. There was no market at all. And actually, we are building this market with the carbon price, with the new regulation, with the new agricultural policy we just agreed on, and so on. So look at that as a systemic change and as a huge market opportunity for you. And in order to design these new policies, and that will be my conclusion, in order to design these new policies, we desperately need a dialogue with you to convince, let's say, the mainstream politicians that it is feasible, that there is a technology somewhere that is not an activist dream, but there is a market, there is a technology, and we can build on it. And we can win this race. And we are into two races at the same time. The first race is against climate. Race, let's say, against natural impact and natural ecosystem shifts. But there is also a race with our competitors, with the US, with China, and so on. So there are two races at the same time. And actually, from a European perspective, what we want is to win these two races at the same time. Because when you look at the global scene, Europe, to be very frank, is not the leader. We all know that in the digital transformation. I mean, by far, the two leaders are China and the US, or the US and China. The race for this generation, we as Europeans, we can contribute to as a leader, is the race to net zero. Because when you look at the figures of the licenses and the patterns, Europe is the place in the world where there are more green patterns and green licenses and green technologies than everywhere else in the world. So if we put the right set of rules in place, you have the technologies to be provided and scaled up, and we all know that more and more citizens, consumers, investors' expectations on this, then we can win this race as Europeans. That's exactly the core of my vision and the core of what I want to deliver from my role of chair of the ENVI committee. And again, I'm very, very happy to discuss in depth with you these topics.
Thank you very much, Pascal, for your comments there. In fact, you're echoing. We just had a question in from Twitter from Julia Bedini asking how the EU can position itself as the hotspot for clean tech globally in light of the competition from other powers such as the US and China. So you've already sort of tackling some of the questions that are coming up for us. You also mentioned the need to persuade politicians of the value of clean tech. But let me ask a follow-up question. What about the need to persuade legacy businesses that it's a good idea? Is there a sense that for some companies they feel clean tech may be a threat? And how do you convince them that they should adopt it?
So what we try to do is also to change the rules of the financial markets. And it's the green finance thing. And on the green finance agenda, a lot, I would say, Europe is the leader of the green finance agenda. Lots have been done, lots have still to be done, but we are already changing quite a few rules that would help you to grow and that will contribute to solve or to respond to the question you raised, meaning are you raising not only awareness, but interest, financial interest of the legacy companies to shift, either to shift in-house or to shift buying technologies outside. And then I'm not an investor, I'm not in the business community, I'm a policymaker, so on that front. I mean, I don't have any stake here and it's good, otherwise that would be in sort of a conflict of interest. So it's up to the market and business dynamic to play. But what I want to make sure as a politician, as a lawmaker, is that we have the good set of rules in place. And for instance, through the one example of the green finance rules we are changing, we call the taxonomy, meaning that we define and will be obviously defined and change over time because technologies evolve over time. So it will be changed over time, but we define what is clean or green and what is not. And doing so, we provide incentives, regulatory incentives, and on the contrary, for technologies of taxonomy or that are not in the space of the green taxonomy. And of course, I bet that 99% of your clean tech technologies would be in the green taxonomy, and that would help very much these technologies to be financed either by the private market or by the public money. I give you one example, and actually Anne mentioned this as well already. Facility. We managed to have for the first time at the European level, and this plan being ranked by the UN as the second greenest in the world after South Korea. And billion euro investments that it's the largest stock in terms of green investment ever, due to the size of the plan and the small. So at the end of the day, when you inject the place where the
Pascal, I think we're having some technical difficulties, but I know that we'd heard actually the main thrust of your arguments there. So thank you for that, and thank you for joining us. I don't know if you can still hear me, but I understand that you're saying that there is an opportunity here to incentivize this sort of scale-up funding, and particularly now with, as Anne mentioned as well, this opportunity, this once in a generation, as she called it, opportunity. So I hope, Pascal, that You will find this an innovative and entertaining and informative, above all, discussion, because we do know that that is a lot of the time what policymakers ask for, that policymakers like Pascal and his fellow MEPs, some more of whom we'll be hearing from later on, need this sort of dialogue and need this sort of discussion. So with that, that leads me very nicely on to introduce you to the director of the Cleantech Group, and that's Jules Besnaino. Jules, how are you there? Can you hear me? Great.
I can hear you great, Jennifer. Thank you so much.
You've had a great introduction there from Anne and Pascal. So I leave it to you now to explain in more detail about Cleantech for Europe.
Indeed, and thank you so much to Pascal Canfin and to Anne for taking the time to be with us today. So before we move on to the panels, I'd like to say just a few words about the Cleantech for Europe initiative and what you can expect from it in the coming months. Because as MEP Canfin was saying, establishing that dialogue between policymakers and the Cleantech ecosystem is absolutely critical. So we created this initiative with the support of Breakthrough Energy, and it already gathers the 10 leading EU cleantech venture capital investors. And with that already super strong base, our mission is quite simple, right? We want to help the EU scale its cleantech innovations to lead the race to net zero. So in President von der Leyen's words, we really want to seize our men on the moon moment, and we think it's absolutely possible. So all the ingredients are here. I think it's been said already for the EU to really become this climate and industrial leader. Citizens are increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and they're ready for change. There's super strong political backing behind a just transition. And most importantly, the EU already has all of the early stage technologies that we need to get to net zero, if only we're able to scale them. So in our inaugural report, to which more than 100 cleantech leaders participated throughout the EU, we really showed that despite this great traction behind cleantech, it is still incredibly hard for cleantech businesses to kind of scale up and to scale low carbon businesses in the EU. I think the reasons behind that, there are a few obviously, but in our opinion, the first one is really that the demand for clean technologies and for clean products is still too low. Especially in markets like steel, like cement, like manufacturing, agriculture, and many others. In addition to that, we find that regulation is quite fragmented throughout the EU. So I had this one case of a super successful maker of batteries that had to recertify their battery pack in each EU country that they wanted to sell it into and to operate in. And of course, they ended up choosing to scale up in the US instead. And lastly, I'd say the third reason is that, again, we're severely lacking scale-up capital and support, meaning that these companies that make it to that place of having a demonstrated technology are having a really hard time to get to commercialization. And that's because, of course, a lot of investors tend to prefer software plays that mature faster, and that a lot of big players like the insurance companies, the banks, the pension funds aren't really involved in this space just yet. And what that means is that we're preventing the EU from reaping, the climate and competitiveness benefits that our innovations could give us, and we're condemning those ventures to move to North America or to Asia instead. So that's the challenge that's ahead of us, and that's the challenge that we have to solve together. How do we help our low carbon innovators become real industrial leaders? And I think in this scale up race, we believe that the role of Cleantech for Europe should be to raise the voices of the EU innovators and the investors working towards that goal. And as Pascal Canfin was saying, to really bring them closer to the policymaking community and to start that dialogue. So here's 3 ways that we think we can do that. The first is to continue to publish regular research to provide really up-to-date and state-of-the-art information on the state of play of EU cleantech, its challenges, how it compares to global peers. And so every quarter, we'll release those briefings that look at the investment levels on the one hand, but also the key players, the key deals, the latest policy developments. And obviously, you can sign up for those quarterly briefings for free on our website. The idea is really to get the two communities to get better informed about what cleantech are, what clean technologies are, and how they're doing. 2 is that we'll participate in the public debate just to make sure, again, that the voice of cleantech innovation is heard and is prioritized. And we're absolutely thrilled that that policymakers are really willing to get into that conversation and eager to hear from these leaders. And so as a consequence, our third kind of action, or the way that we'll play in this scale-up race, is to provide this regular forum where cleantech pioneers can come together with leading policymakers, share a stage, and really exchange ideas about the EU's future. So that's the premise behind today's summit, of course. And this is why you will see all the panels composed of both cleantech and policy leaders in equal measure. So we believe this dialogue is absolutely critical for the EU to take the lead in this sector. So you can expect these events to become a recurring series, and actually we hope that we'll be able to gather again as soon as early November. So we sincerely hope that you all join us on this very important journey, starting with today's summit. And I wish you a really informing and fun session. Back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jules, for that introduction to our two great panels coming up next. Well, welcome back. Our next section is going to be a round table asking how to finance the rise of EU clean tech. As you heard there from our three opening speakers, this scale-up stage is one of the key areas where we need to develop further. And I would say that venture capital funding for clean tech, as Anne pointed out, has hit record highs. She said it's 7.5 times over the last decade. But there are still funding gaps at the growth stage and this scale-up stage. This is not unique to clean tech. Many startups in the EU have this issue in going from just a startup to a real success. We're not even talking about unicorns here. We're just talking about scale up and being able to deliver on the promises that are being made, the targets that are being set to give us a greener transition to a greener future, including things like decarbonisation. So we're going to talk a lot about all of these areas, but in particular, how to get the money where it's needed to deliver on these promises. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers. We have some great experts here. Please do send in your questions to them during the discussion using the hashtag #CleanTech4Europe. So from Set Ventures, we have René Savelsberg, the managing partner. We have Roger Havenuth, Deputy Chief Executive at the EIF. We have Paulina Jmerkha, who is Director for General Affairs in DG FISMA within the European Commission, and Geshem Bonhomme, Breakthrough Energy Ventures for Europe. Thank you very much for joining. I think we may have a little bit of a technical connection issue with one of our speakers, but we're going to get going because I'm sure we will have Paulina in due course. René, let me start with you. Give us your opening thoughts, set out your stall, if you like, and why you think now is important for clean tech for Europe.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be part of this great initiative. I think we all are, and it's very needed. Just by a quick introduction, we are Set Ventures, a venture capital firm started in 2007 on the back of an agreement between the Dutch government and two utilities to set up an independent fund to invest in sustainable energy technology, and that is what Set stands for. And we are very happy that that is now, accumulated into a greater, broader thinking around the energy transition. If we use clean tech as a starting point, that is all about net zero emissions. We have heard it already into the introductions, and you can translate that easily into decarbonization of many sectors. So what we think is happening is that this whole change that we need to happen is not just talking to big companies with that are the incumbents in the energy sector at large, but it's actually more of a broader sector involvement to become part of a new energy system going forward. And the systematic changes that we need in Europe, but beyond as well, to combat climate change and to be also competitive as a region in Europe, We have to look at this from a systematic point of view, where generation, distribution, and storage and use of energy is looked at an integral way, and that we need not only innovations on the generation side or savings on the usage side, but we have to combine it also with technologies where the balance between those two elements are done in a different way. And I heard one of the introductory saying that in the IT industry we have not been the leaders in Europe, but we have to embrace the technologies as well on in the IT sector to make this whole system work in a balanced way. And I'm not sure that the policymakers do fully understand the importance of that, because if we just focus on generation or savings and be smart on those, we will not build the energy system, which is the basis, the mother of all the other clean tech initiatives in agriculture, in water, in circular economies. Then we will miss out on becoming indeed that leader in that future world that we're all embracing.
Thank you, René. Roger, let me turn to you. I presume a lot of what René has just said chimes with your views as well, but let me hear your perspective.
Thank you. Well, to put it in a nutshell, I would say that compared to some 10 to 15 years ago, when the market for clean tech was rather still immature, we see really now a good opportunities with much more interest and traction from investors, private and public. We see also a change in the private sector and the consumer attitude. There is clearly a political backing and clear signals also that this is important. And we see also policy initiative with a clear focus on a number of key thematic areas, such as agri-tech, the circular economy, blue economy, and so on. So I think that is certainly a good evolution. There is also a paradigm shift when it comes to ESG. And I believe some years ago it was a nice to have. Nowadays it's clearly a must. It's also at the center of risk management, and that pleads certainly in favor of a different attitude towards clean tech and climate in general. We have been quite active in this field since 2006, including with investments in set ventures. I'm happy to see René today on the panel. And we see a lot of traction and indeed increase in the activity. And I must say also we are preparing to become even much more present in the coming years. It's also encouraging to see that the European Union through the Commission are throwing their weight in this direction, and so are EIB and the European Investment Fund. But there are also some challenges to overcome. We will certainly talk about them. One of the big areas or issues that was already mentioned is the scale-up finance, where we see a lot of the value creation not staying necessarily in Europe, where we have taken the highest risks, but we do not necessarily have the returns. And there are certainly things we can do about it. Along with that, I think there's also a need to translate the good policy objectives into concrete financing instruments and to make sure that the funds are channeled effectively to the SMEs and the mid-caps, and to make sure that we do this in a way that allows to crowd in private investors, because clearly the public money will not be sufficient. We need to ensure that we have the right incentives, as it was said before, and that we leverage the public money. Last but not least, I think it's important that we have the right tool set. We are going from pure volume, I think. We will see more and more and witness a shift to impact measurement and to making real difference. And I think we need to get it right. I'm rather confident that we will. It's certainly one of the matters that deserves a lot of attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do value your input, of course, with your very unique perspective on this panel. I'm going to turn now to Gaetan. I think we're still waiting for Paulina to join us. We may be victim of some technical gremlins today. Gaetan, one question from Twitter already asking, Roman Bublik asks, how can a startup with a promising clean tech technology get the attention of the breakthrough energy investors? Well, I think he's just done it there with that question, but I will leave it to you to explain further. You're on mute. Mute. Gaetan, I think you're still on mute. No, unfortunately, we cannot hear you. Perhaps, yeah. So we're having one of those days, I think. Perhaps we could try with a headset if you have one to plug in. I will give you a moment or two to try and just get that sorted out. And in that case, I will come back to my other speakers and ask. So, Rene, what about the role of the EU's decarbonisation plans? I mean, what about these plans, the investments that we are hearing that need to be made on a pan-European? Do you think this is going to be a real turning point? Because we often hear that there's a great deal of motivation, there's great aspiration. How do we go from aspiration into practice?
No, I think that if you look at the Green Deal that the EU has been putting forward, which is going through its process right now, it's a great support for the overall trajectory where we need to go. And I think that if you look at the amount of money that is going into this direction, creates a platform for investments of smaller companies that will actually help to shape that future that we all are looking for. That I think is a great support. What you do see in that Green Deal, that it is all about decarbonisation translated into electrification, and even though Cleantech is not energy, but electricity is the mother of all these sectors that were just mentioned, whether it's agriculture, whether it is water, whether it's circular economy, whether it's food processing, construction tech, all of these subsectors need electricity. And that is why it is so important that the support for the electrification of many of these industries is coming in, with the consequence that our overall energy system is going to change dramatically, because we are all becoming a producer, a user, and a potential base for storage of electricity. And that is completely different than we have worked, over the last 100 years. And that systemic change needs to be understood in order to put the right policies in place and also the right taxonomy in place. Because I have a few comments still to be made on why that is not very productive and useful at this moment.
Thank you, Rene. I will come back to you for those comments shortly. I believe Paulina is on the line. We might not be able to see you, but Paulina, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you very well. Do you hear me?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate it, because we do want to get the position. Oh, there you are. We can see you as well. Wonderful.
I apologize a million times. I'm unfortunately traveling today and I had massive connection problems. Whatever device I tried, it all failed. So I'm very sorry about that.
Well, you've rectified it. So we're really extra pleased that you persevered, because it is important on this panel to hear the view of the policymakers. We've just been talking about the aspirations and the need for funding to go from startup to scale up. That was something echoed by our opening speakers as well. So I'd like to know, from your perspective within the Commission, what can policymakers do? And also, what do you need from the industry to give to you in terms of information or expertise?
Well, thank you very much. And again, I'm sorry to come in late. And of course, I did not have the benefit of hearing what previous speakers were saying. I would like to start to thank you all for inviting me. And I think this is a very interesting and very timely conference, a timely exchange, also from the Commission, the policymaker perspective, because here in reality you have two important policy objectives coming together. On the one hand, obviously everything which has to do with the Green Deal, the green transition, the green recovery, by the way, because we're coming out of the pandemic also, hopefully. And then at the same time, this work stream meets another one, which is the Capital Markets Union, which was a project which the European Commission launched back in 2015, precisely because we realized that we have in Europe capital markets that are not so well integrated and functioning as well as we would like them to do. And in that context, precisely the element of SME financing, scale-up financing, was a very important realization. Back then, of course, we thought a little bit less about the clean and the green innovation, but we thought obviously already in 2015 about innovation in general. And I think that gap that we identified and are trying to deal with via the World Capital Markets Union is basically something that I think is very, very relevant also in this discussion on how to finance the SMEs that are active in the green field, in the clean tech space. Now, in terms of what have we done and what can we do? So what we started looking at back in 2015 with the first so-called action plan was actually a lot of things around SME financing, also looking at how to revigorate the European venture capital markets, for example. Sectorization to make sure that banks can sell off loans to free up space to lend to SMEs, and I think we've come some way, although obviously there is still some way to go. What we are looking at now, because we went on with the second CMU action plan in 2020, and that I think is something that goes very much to the core of what we are discussing here in the panel. And that is how to see what we can do in terms of making it easier for SMEs to go public. We have obviously a lot of EU funding that can help here. And I see that Roger is on the panel and the European Investment Fund is doing brilliant work in that space. And we are working with EIF to also see what we can do more to help SMEs precisely in this, let's say, initial phase for SMEs that would want to go public, what we can do to help them do so. There is an issue also around, I think, listing requirements in general in Europe. There is an issue of access to information, of transparency on data. That's also something that we are looking at. And then finally, and there I'm moving a little bit away from the CMU and more back to the, let's say, the pure green agenda again, and that is the issue of taxonomy, which I think that previous speaker was touching on. Now, I think taxonomy is important. It sometimes sounds a little bit technical, maybe, or abstract, but it's really an attempt to have a classification system, a lexicon, if you wish, which basically should help investors, should help financial institutions, should also, of course, indirectly help project promoters to see how can we channel funding into that helps the green development in general, that helps the green transition, but of course also that helps the transition. We know where we are, we know where we want to be in terms of cutting emissions, in terms of climate neutrality by 2050, and there is still obviously things to be done in that space. Now, and that's I will finalize on this point, is the glass half full or half empty? That's always a question of perspective. I still think that we have come some way, so I would rather say half full, but obviously there is still work to be done. And in that context, I think exchanges as this one, conversations also with the practitioners to actually know what is needed, know what is missing. I think that is super useful and certainly also very, very helpful for us as policymakers. Thank you. I will stop there.
Thank you, Paulina, and very good to hear that this sort of discussion is useful to you as well, because it is envisaged as the first of a series of discussions. So we will hopefully develop themes and get into more nuance in future events. Gaetan, let me come back to you. I think your sound is working now, so perhaps tell us a bit more about Breakthrough Energy Ventures. Oh dear, no, it's... I'm afraid we really can't hear you at all, and I don't think you're going to be able to give us enough detail through interpretive dance. So we will have to we'll have to just let that there. Perhaps we can have some comments after our second panel if we want to disconnect and rejoin. We'll try and do it that way. In which case, Roger, let me come back to you. We have a question coming in from Twitter. It's quite a technical one, asking, is the EU Emissions Trading Scheme Innovation Fund working for startups? And are carbon contracts for difference the right instruments to help them? Perhaps you could reflect on that and possibly other instruments that are there for the clean tech startups to take advantage of.
I think you caught me a bit off guard, because on the policy aspect, I think it's probably better with Paulina, but let me say a few words nevertheless on how we see what we can do for the startup and answer the broader question here. First of all, there are quite a number of measures already in place, including from the EU, and they have been around for some time. There are specific programs where we have not only early stage finance, but also particular focus on clean tech. And that has been for a number of years like this. So I think looking back, we have over the time used these schemes, blended them together with our own money and also some private money we have been able to leverage. And I would say even to a ratio of 1 to 3. And to name some of the schemes, it's Innofin, for instance, which was further increased and boosted by European Fund for Strategic Investments. And there is clearly also focus looking ahead now at InvestEU with the themes I mentioned before, namely in the field of climate change mitigation. We are looking at the policy priorities here, and I can already confirm before we have launched this that there is certainly a big momentum to put a lot of investments in this field, but also to make sure that we have the tools. Now, the market-based approach, is there enough pricing and so for startups? I think we have heard already that the pricing is going up. It will have certainly spillover effect. We hope a positive one for SMEs and startups, because they are part of those who contribute, who might not be the leaders, but they are part of the value creation chain. What is really needed, in my view, is to continue building the venture capital ecosystem. We have done a lot again, and this is true also with public and private money. We have been able to lever, and again, a big thanks to the EU for that. But if I look at the situation currently, we are doing fairly well in a number of Western European countries. But the EU is more than that, and I think we need also to continue our endeavors in the Eastern and Central European countries. I think public money can only act to some extent as a cornerstone investment, providing a signal. And so we need indeed to have the right signal to create opportunities also with the private. And that has been one of the main things we have been working on. What makes it really attractive and interesting for private investors to come in? Not necessarily even on privileged terms, but just to see that this is working. And I think nothing works more than showing good results. As I said, the situation has improved over time. The first generation of cleantech funds we went in were giving mixed results. Now the new ones, I must say, have learned a lot, and we have learned also lessons. I referred to some of them before, but clearly I'm more than hopeful that this will make a difference. The ESG, Pauline already explained in detail, and I can only share that view. It is very important. It's an opportunity, but it's really an area which will become mainstream, which will be at the center of the risk assessment, and I think also attractive for private investors and institutional ones. On other programs, in particular, that we are using, I think it's important to start up the ecosystem, but also to boost the scale up. We have a number of initiatives here. One is Escalar, which is again trying to have asymmetric risk sharing. Sorry for the technical term, but here with the public and the private sector. We are looking at another high policy initiative, which is about IPO and what we can do in the pre and the post IPO field. And again, we are doing this together with the Commission. But I think we probably need to scale up the ambitions when it comes really to the tickets and to the funds that are necessary in Europe. And we can only do this at a European level. I think there are a number of national initiatives. Some of them have 100 million, some of them are bigger. Obviously, for the big countries, it's easier to do it than for smaller ones. But what is missing is really a pan-European initiative to go into, for instance, climate fund of funds. And I believe this can only be achieved if you all take our heads together, try to indeed increase the type of funds that have ticket sizes above 700 million. And there is no secret that when it comes to this comparison, for instance, with the US, Europe is, including the UK, lagging behind. I mean, for instance, we have 5 funds with ticket size above 1 billion, and the US has some 40. So it's a factor of 1 to 8. And that's what we probably need in order to attract the type of companies, but also to help them to grow here in Europe. I'll stop here, but there's a lot to be said in addition. I'm sure Paulina and others will take it up.
Absolutely, thank you. It's quite a lot to digest in a short period of time. Gaetan, you've got a new device And I believe we can hear you now. Wonderful. That's fantastic. Tell us a bit more then about where you see the state of clean tech at the moment, of what stage we're at in terms of development. Give us your thoughts from an on-the-ground perspective.
Yeah, well, let me backtrack then and start with explaining what Breakthrough Energy Ventures Europe is, particularly in relationship to Breakthrough Energy Ventures. So, and also different from Breakthrough Energy, which is where Anne Mettler, who is a distant colleague, but colleague nonetheless. So Breakthrough Energy Ventures Europe is in fact some sort of a joint fund between Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is a global fund, actually two funds, $1 billion in size, mostly operated out of the US, but can invest globally. And BEV Europe is those funds partnering up with the European Commission, particularly through the European Program for Research Innovation called Horizon 2020 and the EIF, of course. And the idea was to bring together an understanding of the European market in order to accelerate global decarbonization and support clean energy innovation and reach the market, right? So this is very much an experiment of sorts to try to take patient capital coming from 20-year commitments, which is the length of our Breakthrough Energy Ventures fund, and then couple that with a desire to be a lot more active in all of the countries of the European Union. And let me go a little bit further and define what Cleantech does mean for us. So very specifically for our family of funds, what we try to back are companies breakthrough in technologies that by the horizon of 2050 can be responsible for 500 million tons or 0.5 gigatons of CO2 equivalent emission per year. And CO2, and there are two greenhouse gases that rise to that level, CO2 and methane at that level. So again, 0.5 gigatons to give you a sense if you're talking about next generation dispatchable energy, so 90+% availability, you're talking about 100 gigatons of deployment. If you're talking about mobility, you're talking about 100 million cars roughly operating with an internal combustion engine off the roads, right? So very ambitious breakthroughs, which means also ambitious requirement for scale up once those technologies are demonstrated and need to scale, right? So in that context, I'd say, let me add one thing, which is me personally. I have a technical background all the way to PhD in material science, and all of that was done in Europe. And then just after finishing up my first kind of assignment, I moved to the USA, where I spent 15 years developing technologies for clean tech, including a startup that I took from zero to exit in mostly based in the United States, and came back in Europe and joined the fund. And I would say, kind of to piggyback on what was said, right now, what's missing in my point of view are two main things that are kind of congregating together. One is the availability of large scale-up funds, right? Our fund in Europe is 100 million euro. Even $1 billion, innovation fund like the ones we have in the US are nearly not enough in the market. We need many more of these, and some of those funds can be joint programs or can be funds that come from the public sector under the market conditions, like some of what was discussed before. So that's one, is the availability of funds, particularly in Europe. Secondly, I would say what we can call cross-border companies, right? I think what we see a lot, someone who's been in the US and now is in Europe, is I found that it's excessively hard for us to see business plans that can transcend cultures and be truly pan-European. And I think that comes down through how the European Commission and some of the European institutions can really spearhead those efforts and help be there in partnership, of course, with the national economies. But as a global fund and as a pan-European fund, that's something that we're fairly acutely aware of.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that really strong history there. I'm going to come back to Paulina to build on something that Roger had mentioned, and that was about the need for good conditions for IPOs. So I know you mentioned that they're working together with the Commission on that. Could you explain to me a little bit more about where you think it might be room for improvement?
Yeah, thank you. I will obviously get to that. I just also maybe take the occasion to react very briefly to what has been said by others, because I think a lot's been said, and I agree with a lot of what has been said. I mean, first of all, maybe to pick up on Gaetan's point, which is that yes, public funding has to come in and can be very, very helpful. And Roger, I think, explained very eloquently what the EIF is doing. But I think there's also a consensus on the fact that public funding will not be enough. I mean, the funding needs are so enormous if we're going to get to climate neutrality in 3 decades from now, that we need a lot of public funding. And I think what has been said in terms of in Europe, it's still being very difficult to get to the scale that we need. I think that is absolutely true. I think there is a second point that's also been mentioned by both Roger and Gaetan, and that is the fact that we, of course, in the EU have 27 member states. And I think that's a little bit of something also which is a challenge, because it's clear that capital markets are differently developed in different member states. If it's going to work, then we of course need something that we actually get all the member states to be very, very engaged. And I think that's important for 2 reasons. First of all, because we would need to unlock the financing in every single member state of the European Union, but also additionally because all the member states obviously have a journey to do here in terms of the green transition, and they start from very different places. And that's why I think it's so important to try to get this, let's say, capital market, the CMU, to work and really include all the 27. I think another point, and then I'll come to the IPO, is that, and I think that is the challenge here, that it's not, I think, from a policy perspective, the one measure that, you know, if the European Commission, if the European Union legislators would just put this one rule in place, then everything would be perfect. If there is such a rule, please tell me, and I will follow it up. But I think the experience and the realization that we have done over the last years, when we've really been looking at this in great detail, is that the challenge is that you need to do a lot of things at the same time. You need to, I mean, you need to look at the listing rules. You need to look at prospectus rules. You need to look how venture capital works in Europe, why it does not work. See, why does it work in some member states? Why does it not work in others? Is there a lack of information? What happens when a bank turns away an SME and says, you know, I don't want to give you a loan, but, you know, can the bank maybe help and tell the SME, but you can go somewhere else to get your funding? So there are a lot of things we need to look at here, and that's what we have been doing for the last year, and I think we have, as I said, made some progress. Now, on the particular issue of IPOs, I think this is something that has been consistently raised or brought to our attention when we have done stakeholder consultations, that this is an issue that where there seems to be quite a difference between the EU and the United States in particular, that it is burdensome to go public in Europe. The prospectus rules, we have simplified them a couple of times. We probably need to simplify them again. And as I said, this is something that we mentioned in the second CMU action plan from last year, and something that we are working quite actively on as we speak, to see what we can do to simplify further in this space. So I mean, you know, something that we are very aware of, but again, I think it's not one measure here. You really need to look at a lot of various elements in at the same time, and that's what we are trying to do.
Thank you very much, Paulina. I'm really feeling this strong message about the need for a holistic, systemic, overarching viewpoint in order to tackle this. René, let me come back to you to ask you to build on what you've heard so far. I mean, there were some points I think you wanted to raise. You're on mute.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I missed that. No, we're talking about here policy making, so that's what I'm going to be focusing on now. But what I hear is that there's a lot of initiatives, and you know, a job in itself, and I'm very happy that the Cleantech group, together with the Breakthrough, will take on some of that coordination of what is happening at the EU level to inform us, the market, the venture capitalists, with that. But if you look at the SFDRs that we have to deal with, if you look at the taxonomy that we have to deal with, EIF is coming up with reporting requirements for funds to adhere to certain rules that they want us to engage with. It's a lot of new stuff, which is, if you look at it in detail, it's not coordinated yet. It is still, everybody a little bit of a different angle, and it puts a lot of burden on the fund managers to, on one hand, adhere to the rules, do fundraising, but also do the right investments that will result in where the policy us all wants to move into, which means, decarbonizations of many industries. So I would urge really some coordination there at the EU level, and that's what I hear as well between different bodies. They all are trying to do their utmost best, and it's a very complex task. And I'm not saying that it is easy to change that, but it is very, very complex from the outskirts to follow all of these, and sometimes they're even contradictory. If you take the taxonomy and what the real issues are, and how EIF wants them to incorporate that. So coordination, I would ask for.
Thank you. Thank you very much, René. I'm going to come back, Gaetan, to you. We often find ourselves here in Europe, you've got the experience of being in the States, comparing ourselves with how are other parts of the world doing. And now, obviously, tackling climate change or tackling the aims that the clean tech can deliver for us is a global issue. Is it helpful, or do you think, this kind of, we need to position Europe as a leader in this area is a worthy aspiration?
Well, I mean, the very reason Bill Gates reached out to a number of, and we tend to forget, these were all tech billionaires, right? It's Jeff Bezos. Bill Gates is the figurehead of our fund, but there are many other used to be tech billionaires, some of them European, Xavier Niel and Ansel Plattner. The very reason he formed that group was because there was a bit of a drought in clean tech funding, in private funding, right? And he said we need to find a solution to that. Exactly to the point that was mentioned, because public is not going to get there. We need private. And the premise was that there was a green premium to be overcome through breakthrough technologies, and then find ways to help those technologies grow. But with the example of wind and solar, which have now come down the price and learning to be cost competitive with fossil fuel energy sources for primary energy generation, right? The idea was, let's do this, and we believe we can do this in a competitive market. So in a way, saying, okay, Europe needs to take the lead, and there is a competition to be had, and that's going to form geopolitical systems, and we need to understand what's going to happen there, I think is very important. It's important because we need a market economy. We need this to be in a context where you start incorporating the externality. I mean, we all have lived through the time when the idea of some sort of carbon tax was a crazy idea. And here we are at 60 euros per ton in the euro market. And that's creating all sorts of fantastic dynamics. It's very transparent. Everybody can figure it out. Sure, there are issues with it, but by and large, this is creating a competitive dynamic that gives a chance for green products to come on the market and be connected. So in my mind, when it comes to thinking about the future of mobility, when it comes to thinking about the future of hydrogen, for example, for industries, Europe's going to have to figure out how it becomes a champion, how it creates its own internal company, its own internal supply chain. And there is, in fact, a joint discussion to be had between people like us who are completely market driven. And we have a global fund, as a matter of fact, right? I run the European fund, but we have a fund where, as far as we're concerned, as long as generally speaking, there is competition coming out, it can only be good in so many aspects. But aside from that, we're all very aware of the fact that there are geopolitics at play when it comes to climate change and who's doing their part and what does that mean for short distance economies and supply chains. So excited to see competition.
Okay, and thank you very much. I'm conscious of the fact we're coming to the end of our time for this panel. It seems to have flown by so quickly, but of course, this always happens when there's such a vast area of things to discuss. But what I'd like to do is go around each of you in turn and ask, what would be your message to take away from this discussion? And also, what should you like to talk about next? If we were doing another series of these events, what do you think is the next big area that we talk about? We talked a lot about scale-ups today. Where do you think we need to drive the conversation next? Roger, let me start with you.
Thank you, and I would like also to briefly comment on the right point raised by René, which is one of the issues. I think taxonomy and measurement are certainly at the heart. I believe we need to find a balanced approach, certainly looking at the target community we want to support SMEs. On the good side, I would say the shaping of the taxonomy is done with all the stakeholders. So we are certainly EIB and EIF part of these discussions. May still take some time, but what is also good is that we have InvestEU. And in that context, clearly there is already an agreement on what we consider to be climate relevant and some aspects of putting this into the taxonomy. So it is a journey, I agree, both for the EU institutions to which René was referring, but probably also for the funds themselves. We see it also as a journey. We don't expect everything, but we want to accompany the funds on this journey and making sure that over several generations, in response to the identification of areas of improvement, we can indeed make it and come to more focused investments. What is another area which I find important is measurement, impact measurement. It's not only about volumes, making sure that we have the right technologies, that we support also the right technologies, that we avoid greenwashing, and certainly that we find a way to effectively attract private investors, like Paulina said. It's we need a lot of public money, but the public money will never be sufficient. We need to bring on board the private. One point which was, or 2 points which were not so much in this panel addressed. One is certainly regulation harmonization. I think you had a telling example in the background material where you were referring to Sonnen, which we supported. And indeed, it's difficult if a company has to get authorization for business needs in every member state separately. And the other one is digitalization, which I see rather as an opportunity, because AI, machine learning, blockchain, big data can help with the measurement and accuracy of the reporting. And I think this can be one of the areas which could alleviate. And the other one is certainly agreeing on how we can maybe directly reach out and capture certain information from portfolio companies rather than having to go all the chain. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger. We'll take note of those suggestions. I think possibly, yes, the evaluation is also an important area to look at for the future. René, your closing thoughts, your aspirations, and where to go from here.
Yeah, I keep it short. I applaud the EIF for working with its portfolio companies, venture funds like us, to get on the journey, that the word was mentioned, to integrate ESG, but also impact into the operations of a fund manager. And I think that is a part of the solution, and that might be a good topic for our next session to see how fund managers can adapt to what is measured, because what is measured gets done. And what gets measured should also be remunerated. Venture capitalists are still remunerated largely on financial return, but we have also an impact agenda here. And I see not many funds already changing to that metric and allow themselves to be remunerated on that. I think that is an important topic also to get the policymakers closer to what the fund managers do and therefore what investments they will make, because that circle needs to be closed. I think I would suggest that being a topic for our next session.
Thank you very much, René. Gaetan, your closing remarks, please, as well.
Yeah, I mean, let me state one thing that is pretty obvious maybe, but also needs to be part of the discussion. There is here a discussion between funds that fund early stage companies that, because those funds have been in existence quite some time, are seeing those companies at the point where they need to scale. And to scale, we the investors and the companies that we back need clarity into what's going to be available to them to scale in terms of public financing, private public financing, and the mechanisms thereof, right? And so I think there is plenty to be discussed that, but there is one actor there that is not mentioned that I think is super important is the incumbents, right? The incumbents will keep existing in one way or another, whether it be big energy companies, utilities, big industrial companies, materials companies. So, and right now they are in many ways in a position to create a demand. And so if, all together we can find a way to create a massive demand in European market in a way that helps, streamline standards and streamlines what is required for the materials to find a purchaser and find a project manager that is not the startup or the innovation provider, I think we'll have a big win there. And so I think that anything that we can do to start creating that market where it's obvious what financing tools are available, whether it be public, private, and how people can arrange in function of a market-based demand, I think we've got a win there. So would be always interested to see how all the products are thinking of developing beyond the ETS, which is already in place, can help, get that clarity for everybody so that we can move in the right direction all together.
Thank you very much. Great thoughts. Paulina, I will leave the final word to you in terms of your aspirations for an event like this for the future and how to get policymakers what they need and how to deliver on the opportunities of clean tech, which I think throughout the discussion so far today, we all agree is something very desirable.
No, thank you very much, and it's I will be brief, but I feel as you said, there's so much to say. So we could continue for many hours still. Maybe 3 points from my side, very briefly. I think first of all, what I take from this discussion is that I think we are on the right way, although clearly there is a lot to do. But at least I think we the ship is sailing in the right direction, and that is good news. The second remark I want to make is I was a little bit sad to hear that the EU rules continue to be so complicated, because I think we are, at least our hope is that with the taxonomy framework, with the sustainability reporting framework, that at least the framework should be clear. And then, of course, I can see that there's certainly things that maybe need to be clarified or operators need to get used to. But at least we are aiming to have an EU framework which makes sense and which hopefully should not be changing all the time. Now, in terms of what is there more to discuss, I think what colleagues on the panel have said makes a lot of sense. I would maybe add 2 things. One of them was mentioned en passant by Roger, but I think it's very important, and that's the greenwashing. Because indeed, I think it is the fashion of the day to be green and sustainable, but we need to be, I think, very vigilant to see that this is really the case and not that we don't see greenwashing. We have seen some front page financial services news on this recently, and I think we need to be very vigilant to that. And then the second dimension, which I think would be useful to explore further, which has been touched on by other speakers, but we didn't have time to really go into detail. And that is, of course, the international dimension here. I mean, we need to do what's right here in Europe, but at the same time, there's a whole world around us. Gaten spoke about competition. I mean, that may be a positive thing, but I do think that when it comes to rules around taxonomy, rules around disclosure and transparency, it would not be realistic to think that the whole world would do the same thing, but I do think that it is in our interest to have rules that are comparable and convergent, and that is certainly something that we are doing in our international platform for sustainable finance, in the G20 work streams, in the Financial Stability Board work streams, and in other fora. And I think this is probably also something that we may wish to expand a bit more on a future session, which is basically the international dimension. What is Europe doing? What is the US doing? And what are others doing? But I will stop there, and thanks so much again to all of you.
Thank you very much, Paulina. Thank you to all our guests. Really fascinating discussion. Sadly, too short, but better to have more to talk about for the future than to think we have somehow solved all the questions in one short panel. It was never going to happen. But thank you again for your input. Very much appreciated. And I hope we will have some of you back on future panels. With that, we will leave this first discussion, but coming up next, we have a roundtable on demos to scale from clean tech to climate and industrial leadership. Well, as I mentioned, this next panel, we are going to be looking at industrial leadership. We're going to be asking, how can we create champions, if you like, to lead the way with clean tech? I mean, the EU has become a bit of a hotspot for early stage technologies, but innovators trying to scale up are facing a lack of clear demand signals and fragmented markets. This is a perennial problem with the EU. We have, in theory, a single market, but we're going to ask if we really do have in practice, especially for the clean tech area. Now, we have some excellent speakers for you on this panel. Again, I'm very pleased to be joined by our speakers. We have Donal O'Rian, who is the Managing Director of Ecosem. Kirsten Jorna is the Director General of DG Grow in the European Commission. We are hoping to have, with our technical faults there, we are hoping to have MEP Jutta Guteland from the Environment Committee in the European Parliament. But we do have, I see Eva Majdal, who is a MEP and member of the ITRE Committee. Eva, lovely to see you. And Ivo Nemcik, who is the Vice Chairman of the Board at Invent Capital. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to give a couple of words to each of you just to set out your position and what you think we need in terms of leadership, in terms of champions, in terms of driving this forward. So perhaps you can set the stage. Donal, if I start with you.
Thank you very much, Jen. Very pleased to contribute a few comments to start the show. First of all, just to say what we are, if you were to describe us as the only successful low carbon startup in the cement sector in Europe, I would of course be deeply flattered, but I wouldn't be motivated to disagree with you. We've been 20 years now since we got into this business. We only make low carbon cements. We will introduce this year into the French and European markets the 2 lowest carbon cements that Europe has ever had, in terms of down by a factor of 7 times lower than conventional cements. And so we have a level of sophistication and technical ability now that's second to none in terms of the low carbon cement area. We have a problem as well, and the problem is scalability. And the problem comes from the limited quantity of raw materials, suitable raw materials that are available that we can work with. And we took on that problem of scalability, not the financial one, the physical barrier of not having enough raw materials. We started to look at that 5 years ago, and we developed a completely new approach to allow us to use a much wider range of materials to overcome that barrier, to give us a scalable technology we can now apply across Europe. And that, based on our latest results, which are now mature results, would allow us to decarbonize in a hard to abate sector, cement sector, 70%, take away 70% of its emissions within this decade. So you need to stop thinking about cement as being a hard to abate sector. This is not that hard or that expensive to do, but you need to use new technology. And now I feel that something like, you all know the expression, the valley of death, where you try to take a new idea from a successful trial in a laboratory into make a successful company around it. We've gone through the valley of death in terms of setting up our business. Now I feel like we're about to climb the Everest of scalability, in terms of which is no less a challenge for us. The problems the first problem we have identified is that the various aids and supports and grants that are available are not really targeted at the company in the stage we're at. If we were the startup, we could get money, our hands on money. If we were a mature incumbent, said we have a problem with CO2 and we'd like to reduce it, we could get our hands on money. But here we are saying we have virtually no CO2 footprint. We'd like to show everyone else how to reduce their carbon footprint. And people say, oh, no, we don't have money for that. Sorry. So we have that problem. We have the policy, I think, needs to be, I must say, the 2 remarks I heard earlier on in the first panel that really stuck in my mind were, first of all, the importance of mutual understanding. I think Anne Mettler made this remark, between the great clean tech community and the policymakers. There must be much closer, a better fit between policy and what clean technology are doing. We can elaborate on that point later. And the second and final point I make now is what Pascal Confin said about the rules of the game. In our business, the cement business, the rules of the game are the standards that are set for the cement and the concrete. And the concrete in particular says you can make this concrete any way you like, as long as you use only the cements listed in Appendix B. And when you go to Appendix B, it lists all the cements that are currently in the market and not the new cements. And it's a hell of a battle over time and energy and money to persuade. We have to do it country by country. It's 27 times the cost of doing it. If we had a harmonized standard, we don't have a harmonized standard. And that is the big barrier. I've been going to this sort of conversation for 10 years now about policy in Europe. Every time the subject comes up, the importance of norms as barriers to innovation comes up. So far, nothing has been done about it. It's absolutely essential. If the technology we have now can make the cement sector. I noticed in Cleantech's website they say that cement will need to, the building material sector in general will need to reduce its carbon footprint by 39% by 2030 to meet the challenges of the Fit for 55. There is absolutely no chance the cement industry will be able to contribute anything to that without new technology. This technology can get well beyond 55% reduction. But the real barrier in a way is that the rules of the game say don't use this technology. If you want to make concrete, use the stuff that's allowed here, which is the stuff that causes pollution when it's manufactured. So we need to change that, and we need to change that very, very urgently indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Donal. A challenge there to our policymakers to react to what you're saying there. But I'll turn next to Ivo, just to get your perspective and maybe some more examples to build on what Donal has said.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to be with you today. Maybe as a very short and brief introduction, as it was mentioned, I'm with Invent Capital. We are a VC fund backed by CEZ, which is utility, and the European Investment Bank, with 240 million euro of committed capital invested in innovative startups creating solutions for reducing CO2 footprint. Given the size of the fund, we are probably one of the first funds in Cleantech in Europe focusing on growth stage companies, and actually our first investments specifically in the companies such as Zonen, Sunfire, Tado are basically a good examples of those. For our discussion today, actually my opening statement would be there is no reason not to be bold today. And I think that it has been also reflected in the previous discussion. Through the COVID, we experienced that things can change really fast if the priorities are put on the right things. And now we have really unique opportunity with the Green Deal budget and also all the kind of private money around to focus it on the right things. But the kind of the first attribute for this is the kind of the policy and regulatory environment. So that would be kind of my initial statement here. When it comes to our experience for building a European scale-up, again, I will just repeating the kind of obvious standpoints. What are the key bottlenecks in Europe? So the first one here is definitely a lack of capital for scale-ups. We can see it also from the last survey of Cleantech Group that less than 7% of the overall Cleantech growth capital or capital is basically going to the growth phases of the startups. And also at the same time, if you want to build a startup, it is really capital intense with high working capital environment. Until now, the whole ecosystem was pretty small. The specialist Cleantech funds with 100, 200 of committed capital was kind of not, do not have kind of deep enough pockets to really move companies to the next stage. So in this regard, if I may, what would be my kind of suggestion? and this is basically related to previous discussion about financing and the point that we really need holistic kind of view and approach. I think that we really need to look at different ways how to deploy capital into the ecosystem. We are talking about a couple of trillions of euro that needs to be deployed in the next 9 to 10 years. And as one of the examples I would focus on is basically the kind of alternative financing vehicles that basically for financing of distributed assets, which are important for two reasons. First one is we actually need aggregators of these distributed assets because the decarbonization is going down from utility scale projects to basically decarbonizing of households, which is highly fragmented area. And the second point, when it comes to other financing solutions such as banks, it might take a longer time given the regulatory requirements and so on. So basically having these vehicles, good examples in the US, Generate Capital, Sunlight Financial, Loan Pile, basically this type of financing structures, they can help the ecosystem and they can help also us, our startups. We have a couple of marketplaces actually deploying distributed assets such as Zolar or Voltaire in the Czech Republic, and basically the financing routes are important if you want to grow at scale and deploy the product for the mass market.
Thank you, Ivo. I want to turn, Kirsten, to you. I think you could probably hear the frustration from Donald there about having to do different things with different member states, and Ivo talking as well about fragmentation. Now, I mean, it's difficult because member states will often just go their own way. But what can be done at an EU institutional level by the Commission, and what in turn do you need in order to hear these messages?
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you for putting us the challenge and showing to us as well that, you know, one might think that on Cleantech, here we go again, scientific expertise, top-notch technology, and then we lose the momentum because we can't scale it up to industrial excellence. And I want to say, forget that. That's not true. And don't believe it when you hear it. And thank you, Ivo, for mentioning the vaccines, because that's an example. We had most of the vaccines, actually, scientific excellence invented in Europe, but you know, at a certain stage, beginning of this year, we were not being able to ramp up the industrial production. People thought, but we did. Today, Europe is the biggest hub for vaccine production on COVID, and we're also the biggest exporter. And, you know, just in some numbers, from 25 doses in January, we are today at more than 300 million doses per month. So we can do it, and we will do it. We will do it on Cleantech, because on Cleantech, again, we have scientific excellence. And thank you, Donald, for your example. I didn't know that one. Scientific excellence. 8 of the top 10 Cleantech companies, they are in Europe. 70% of the mutual funds on ESG in general, they are in Europe. So we have to leverage that. And I'm very happy to be part of this discussion today, because from my point of view as a policy maker, we need money is fine and we need money, but that's not all. And in particular, Ivo, the point that you made, it's not money as a quantity, it's quality money, smart money. And we have loans for the bigger ones. We have, Donald, you said that as well, for the startup, but there is a kind of something to bridge with in between for the scale up. And I'd like to make some publicity here for our 3 billion public venture fund, the European Innovation Council Fund, which is really the policy instrument to address that gap. And I say that because I'm also the board member. I'm one of the 2 commission board members on this fund. We in the pilot phase, we had something like 150 companies. It's easy to apply. We give blended finance, so up to 2.5 million grants, and then up to 15 million equity. And we have, and it's for breakthrough technology that helps us to achieve our objective, which is the twin transition, digital and green. And in our portfolio already today, we have magnificent examples of companies that do waste recycling, AI for wind and renewable production. We have a champion who was just, declared one of the 4 most innovative companies in Europe at the Hanover Fair. So the traction is there, and I can only ask to help us and companies to apply and look at this. It's very simple to apply, and it fills a market gap. And to Ivo, I mean, help us crowd in. Help us co-invest with us in these ventures. But it's not only money, I said. It's also regulation. And Donald, I hear you on the standards, and we are coming out with because that was announced in the industry strategy, with a new strategy on standardization, which one pillar of it, and that's towards the end of the year, but one pillar of it is to have a foresight on standards. What's the standards that we need for the technologies of tomorrow? Not wait until the technologies are there and then start thinking, well, how do we develop the standard? Hydrogen will be an example, and maybe we will get the chance to speak a bit more about hydrogen still. So it's the rules, and then of course there are also rules, our Fit for 55 package that really gives a framework also for investors. But then there is a third element, and that I would call relations. It's you cannot just think in terms of technology, and you cannot just think in terms of company, and you cannot just think in terms of sector. What you really need to think of is in terms of industrial ecosystems. I don't know if you can see them. These are the 14 biggest industrial ecosystems, and we need to bring together the value chains. Like on hydrogen, it's not only about production of hydrogen. It's not only about you in cement or steel using hydrogen. It's about renewable energy, production of hydrogen, transport and storage of hydrogen, and industrial use of hydrogen, all of it. And this is where our industrial alliances come in, where they bring together the different stakeholders to really allow for the industrial scale up of the industry. So, conclusion of my introductory remark: triple R, resources, financial, the good ones, relations, the collaboration, and regulation. You need the 3 of them. And what we're doing now with our industrial strategy and our ecosystem approach is bringing it all together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsten, for those remarks. And I'm glad you mentioned the vaccines as a positive example. But of course, that came about in a crisis scenario. And although many people are sounding the alarm on climate crisis, we don't seem to have reached that tipping point yet where we're taking it so seriously. So Jutta, let me ask you about what are the potentials here? We've got this Fit for 55 strategy. Do you see that as maybe being a way that we could send strong signals about the demand for clean tech?
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for all these interesting panelists and their view on this. I must say that I really believe that the technology will come from companies, from people who have the ideas, who work on the floor, who know the conditions and have the skills. But the political leadership is definitely about sending a signal that is strong enough to be the light for the future, to be that star that we can all to walk against or towards, I mean, not the other way, towards. And I believe that's the role from the political arena. And at this moment, I would say that star is brighter than in a very long time, because the Fit for 55 package is really giving us a clear indication where our future are, and it is much more clear that it will not change the upcoming years. It will only grow stronger, the political signal that we need to change, and that the transition toward a fossil-free economy is there. And with all that said, I think we have a couple, from my perspective, Swedish examples that shows that if the signal is clear enough, miracle can happen. And me, who was legislator also last legislature in the European Parliament and worked with the ETS, I know that I had lots of meetings with the steel industry, as one example, who were so worried about the future, worried about both the global competition, but also that they saw it as practically impossible to change their production to get rid of the CO2 emissions, and thereby they felt hurt by the ETS. That would be it would be only more and more costly to not change. And there is a completely different tone today. It's like night and day. We have a completely different discussion, especially in Sweden, where we have hybrid as one example, creating fossil-free steel with new technology. And there is this optimism that was not there last legislature. And I think there, yes, the signal from the political arena was there, the technology, the will from the industry to change. And then also the third combination that you need is to find cooperation between that two levels, the politics and the companies, and find ways for everyone to join in the big scale project that's needed. And there, of course, finance is one part of it, but I think it needs to be a combination there where where the government can help in our member states or the EU level, but there need also to be a will from different companies to go together. And I think hybrid is a Swedish example that shows that what can happen when companies actually do that. I also would like to conclude by saying that I think it was Jorna who mentioned also what happened in the vaccine in industry and the complete change, or a quick change from something that's only in the lab to something that is big scale all over the globe. And that is showing also what can happen when you go from talking about it to really helping out and creating the arenas necessary, and also putting in money to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jutta. That was really insightful. Now, Kirsten did mention the twin transition, so the green transition and the digital transition. Eva, your colleague has spoken quite a bit there about the green transition, but I know you are particularly interested in advancing of digital technology. So perhaps you can see where that might maybe make a link with the Cleantech for Europe agenda.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and a big thank you for the organizers for having me today. It's a real pleasure because I've met some of the participants some months ago, and our meeting resonated a lot into my work. And what I mean is that I sit with the EPP group, and I sit in committees that work on innovation, on technologies related to the industry. And as the largest group, very much we are focused on the discussions on what should be the aim, what should be the percentage we should aim, what should be the year we should aim to achieve that percentage. But I kind of feel that sometimes we talk a little bit less on the how to get there. And I think discussions such as today's are not just timely, but a lot of thoughtful group of people were put together. And I think there is a number of examples we could take away to start talking, but also acting a little bit more on that how, and what are those projects that are worth scaling up. So indeed, as you've mentioned, I normally talk a lot about the potential of data, about AI, about digital technologies as a whole, and I've spent a lot of time legislating around that area. And also how to advance the free flow of data and the open science cloud and so on. So this could probably tell you I'm some sort of a tech enthusiast, and I believe the technology could drive our society forward, but most importantly, could provide the solutions to those very urgent issues that we've put on the table and very high aims that we've allocated for Europe to walk in the next couple of years. And I think it can be the technology that has this net positive effect on our society, and it could definitely also lead us to sustainable economic recovery. So precisely defining vision for the future, a climate neutral Europe for 2050. I think we have to focus on the potential of digital technology, but I also could tell you that I see a small challenge there, because many would tell you that the tech sector is one of the reasons for the surging energy demand. If you look at the percentage, the tech sector already accounts to the CO2 emissions. So digitalization of industry is ongoing, and we cannot increase those figures, nor we should overlook the challenge of how to decrease them. So this is why I think clean tech is absolutely key, not just for the industrial new industrial revolution that is happening and that hopefully will scale up, but also for the sake of the tech companies themselves. At the same time, I think net zero Europe is also an opportunity for us to preserve our economic prosperity, but most importantly, sustain it for our future generations. Europe has been a driver of innovation in the past, but we need to regain this technological and innovative leadership in key sectors. And some of those key sectors are present today, and some of others are mentioned in the Cleantech Europe report. So I would like to see more collaborations, also more, why not, private-public collaborations. In some member states, that's kind of a no-go, but it's an opportunity that should be explored. I would like to use also the regulatory options we have to stimulate this sort of projects across Europe. If we look at the Resilience and Recovery Fund, it will be also scrutinized by the European Parliament and its implementation. I think it's important to have projects not of today, not of yesterday, but projects really of tomorrow, the ones that would help us achieve those ambitious goals. And why not member states to decide to be a little bit more ambitious than already allocated targets for green and tech allocation. I'm currently joining you from Berlin, where our group, the EPP, is meeting to kind of discuss the future of Europe. But what for me would be important is to make sure we discuss how technologically we can get to that future that we foreseen in the next 10, 15, 20 years to come. And that's why today's discussion brings a lot of, I think, added value to our work as policymakers, but hopefully we'll be able to deliver. It's not a topic, if you read the headlines, it's not a topic in most capitals. And I think it might not be a topic due to German elections, French elections happening, and there's a lot of hesitation on where we should be advancing on some of these topics. So at least we could hopefully through today's discussion kind of go out of the Brussels bubble, and I think we do it already through the meaningful speakers that are on these panels, but ideally will resonate in member states, because I think the ambition there should be higher to support the private initiatives in sustainable but also meaningful ways.
Thank you, Eva. Great to hear that update, and I think you're probably very right in identifying the difference between what maybe we here feel is important in Brussels versus what is being talked about in the capitals. Donal, I'm going to come back to you because, I mean, you've heard now a lot from some of the policymakers here in Europe, and I'm wondering, we've talked about some of the difficulties in future-proofing. What would you say is needed in order to future-proof, to use that phrase, the future laws and policies?
Well, I think the appropriate solution needs to be tailored to the case in question. Clearly, there is, from the discussion today, the scaling up gap exists. It's not a fiction. And it exists in terms of access to finance, and it exists in terms of the regulatory changes necessary to accommodate new technology. And those are the two big elements for me. I'm very happy to propose to Kristen for her team working on the new strategy on standards, to use our problem, the problem of norm changes in the cement and concrete industry, as a test case to see how that new strategy would it be effective or not in impacting on the changes there. Because the overall consideration for me is the absolute extreme urgency of reducing CO2 emissions. Absolute, it's a crime to emit 1 ton more than is absolutely necessary in this decade of CO2. We need to hit our targets of at least a 55 reduction by 2030, and that's it. We already have 15% of the time available gone. We're already through the second year. If we take another 2 to 3 years to change the standards, practically half the time will have gone. So we'll have doubled the challenge. We'll have to get the change done in 5 years instead of 10 years. That we really, urgency requires us to pull out all the stops. Now, I have the feeling, to be honest, from the comments, that actually everyone's on the same page here. Everyone wants the same result. But we have to say, if we don't act as a team and work together, closely together, and there isn't joined up thinking, then we're going to make life a lot more difficult for ourselves. And that would be a terrible price to pay, given the opportunities that are there.
Well, Donal, let me ask you a quick follow-up question there. I mean, you said you've been in this business for 20 years. Do you see a change over that time? Because, 20 years ago, we weren't talking about Cleantech.
Yeah, we were. I set up this business as a Cleantech business 20 years ago. I'm glad to say. Yeah, look, in the cement industry, to be clear, the cement industry is detoxifying itself in terms of technology. It's getting rid of reducing its technical ability, its level of commitment into new technology, because it sees itself as defending its core interest, which is to continue to produce clinker. As long as the industry structure stays like that, what counts in the industry is who produces clinker, because clinker is the key product that's going into the market. The cement industry will be happy to adopt whatever costs are involved in carbon capture and storage to keep that structure in place, because it knows that if it has double or treble the price of cement, the customer will still pay, because there are no alternatives. So the industry is being realistic about that. That's how it defends its best interests. It's not interested in technology that says, hang on a second, 80% of the assets you have are stranded assets and going to have to be closed in the next 10 years. It's not interested in a solution like that. It sees that as devastating the industry. So we've got to realize that we're up against a mindset which is viscerally opposed to a change in technology in the sector. So the challenges of persuading, it's a matter of persuading. When I talk to individuals and I talk to a lot of them, I'm always struck by 90% plus of them want to have a way to work towards a cleaner future for the industry. but the drivers of the industry say protect the big investment you've made in existing technology, whatever it costs, and that means very slow decarbonisation and very expensive decarbonisation ultimately. So I think we those of us who want to see carbon stripped from the cement industry much faster, the cement industry at least be up to the standards of the Green New Deal by 2030. The obligation on us is to move fast. And there, of the two issues on scaling up, finance and regulatory issues, regulatory is the elephant in the room in this particular case. So it has to be the focus of attention.
Thank you, Donal. I very much appreciate this really practical, hands-on example that you're giving us. I'm going to turn, Kirsten, to come back to you. We're talking about standards, but in some of the previous panels, we also talked about how to make Europe a leader globally. And I'm wondering, how do we ensure that Europe, if you like, is a standard maker rather than a standard taker? Oh.
The first thing I have to say here is that probably we have the best standardization system in the world in Europe. We have the best standardization system in the world because we only write into our single market rules what we want to achieve: clean, secure. So they're very open notions, and the clean notion will be very important in the future as we move on. But then we have the standardization system to actually complement it. And if you have a standard produced by the European standardization system, number one, it removes all 27 national standards. Number two, it gives any producer the presumption of conformity, which is important if you want to market your product, that you're in line with the regulation. This kind of system, dual system, nobody else has it. Others have either standards or regulation. Many legislators write actually this type of, how to do it into the law, which means if innovation happens, the law is outdated, but it takes a long time to kind of review the law. So the basics asset of our standardization system is good. Now, what is not working perfectly at the moment is the anticipation part. And this is maybe explained by the fact that like 20 years ago, innovation cycles were much longer. So you innovated, research and development, and then you still had time to do the standard. That is not true anymore because innovation changes quicker. I mean, AI is one of the elements here, and technology develops quicker. Also because, as you said, Donna, the challenge are, more pressing now. We do not have, 50 years to get CO2 free. So in order to address that, we have to make our European standardization system more agile. And that means, what I said already, the foresight. And when we do research and development, immediately we have to embed in that work the standardization aspect. What's the future norm for that technology? So the embedding, that's one of the ideas. And then, of course, there is the international standardization world, because in all of this, we are not alone. And we had incidents on lithium, for example, where other incumbents, not European, were actually trying to jockey the international standardization system and trying to get their standards out, because it's still who has the standards has the market. So that we have to improve our kind of reactivity in that as well. And therefore, I'm very confident that we will be made, because we have this very good system in the first place and these excellent experts in the system, that we will be able to improve this very much to accompany the rollout and the scale up of technologies like yours. Donald, I'm very happy to take that as a case study. And I also very much like the painting behind you, which is the bridge that has to come to connect. I think that is what we are really talking about in this. We have to connect between the industrial excellence and the kind of technological excellence, and we have to make your bridge connect so that our twin transition can pass across it.
Thank you very much. A very nice link indeed to the background, and of course, and you have your mug as well as our many props today. I have a question that's come in from Twitter from Thomas Pellerin-Carlin, who is asking to the MEPs, what can you do to make sure that Cleantech for Europe business voices are heard in Brussels by fellow MEPs and by national ministers, and how to avoid that the business voices on the Fit for 55 continue to be monopolised by incumbents who fear disruption. So that's a question for him. Jutta, perhaps you could address that first.
No, I think my experience from working, especially with the ETS reform last legislature, is that lobbyism can be quite active. And I remember also that there were some ideas from the cement industry back then, and I think that had influence on the free allocation last time that the industry was very active the last week before the vote, and I think that changed the outcome in the parliament from the ideas that were there before that very push. And I'm not saying that to help the industry to do the same. I think the dialogue is important. I do think we have better tools today to also make sure that it's more visual for the citizens who we meet. So if you are the rapporteur, for example, you need to have a declaration which industry you will meet when you work with that legislature, and that is transparent, and I think that will be helpful. I also think the industry is more aware this time that this transition is nothing you can hide from. So I think there will be more constructive talks this time, I think, about how to do the transition, and the obstacles might be more about the devil in the details. Like this is really problematic with how the benchmark looks or something, and hopefully there will be more understanding that we need to have less allowances. We need to change this so the ETS price becomes higher. We need also with the free allocation to change that. So I believe that there will this time hopefully be more about how to do it than if to do it. So maybe I'm too hopeful here, but I think this time it's more transparent, and it's also a stronger leadership from both the Commission and the whole political arena.
Thank you. Eva, the same question to you. This is a sort of perennial Brussels problem of lobbying. And I suppose what we've got to think about when we're talking about innovative and new businesses is that perhaps they don't have the experience in how to lobby or how to get their messages through to the policymakers who matter.
Yes, indeed. And I think that hydrogen is actually a very good positive example and at the same time negative example. And we see it clearly through the eyes of our portfolio company Sunfire, which is one of the European leader in green hydrogen. The company has been established in 2010. We invested in 2015. And basically since the beginning, besides the technology development, they basically had to put significant effort in the kind of policy shaping development. Even on the level of Hydrogen Europe, the funder was really active there. So for me, the not very positive example is that it really takes a very long time to achieve some important milestones. At the same time, what we have experienced in 2020 as a basically turning point of hydrogen, after announcement of hydrogen strategies in most of the European countries, after announcement of hydrogen strategy of European Union, this was a clear turning point. And basically now the company can really work on kind of their long-term projects. We have investors we have never seen before. We have a kind of long-term private equity investors who wants to support the company not only on the direct company level, but as well on the project level. So really take hydrogen as an example. What can happen if there is kind of a triggering point, setting up clear and long-term vision for a kind of certain industrial vertical.
Thank you, Ivo, for those thoughts. Eva, coming back to you, tell me a bit about the role of the recovery, the post-pandemic recovery plans, and how that might be a lever for clean tech.
Thank you, Jen. If I may just very briefly address the question of Thomas and add a little bit what was already said, if you don't mind, and then that would lead me to my second point. Well, so I think we need to amplify this good projects. Indeed, sometimes companies that are yet to scale up are perhaps not that well embedded into the Brussels monstrous structures for some. And this is why I think I've been trying to do that ever since the beginning of this mandate, and probably a bit in the previous one. And I'm very happy to see that I've at least managed to create better awareness within my own group. And now there's a number of supporters with who we actively work on a grouping that we called AI for Sustainability, where we just don't want to put nice words on a paper. We want to make sure that we demonstrate the group that the Recovery and the Resilience Fund, for example, or other private funds or member states or private companies can address, can take as an inspiration, and why not in the next couple of years see those ideas stir into action and realized ideas on the ground. I think when it comes to the recovery and resilience, it's very important that there's more cross-border investments, that there's more cooperation between member states, and there's cooperation on the big topics, whether it's batteries, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's steel, whether it's iron. We cannot just look. I mean, I kind of feel the pandemic made us also perhaps close ourselves even further into our own borders. I think it's time to make sure that we cautiously start to work with our neighbors, but not just our neighbors, on those big key infrastructure and transportation projects that could help us get to the ambitious goals. And if I may address briefly a little bit what we are doing from an AI side of things, because it was also mentioned from the previous panel and previous speakers. So for the part of the audience that's not familiar, we have set up a new AI committee in the European Parliament. The idea for that committee is to look to the newest developments, not to contemplate what AI has achieved so far. So when we looked in that committee within specifically the AI and the Green Deal, we've managed to estimate with the help of experts that ICT technologies are capable of reducing 10 times more greenhouse gas emissions than their own footprint. So we are working of creating at the moment European data spaces. That would mean that more environmental data will be collected. We'll get more insights, hence hopefully contributing to more progress. And I'm kind of confident that this data will help European industries, will also support the startups and their innovative potential in making sure to put their bright ideas to a test, but also perhaps why not create the next deep tech innovation in Europe, or support the ones that are already in the works. So there's a lot to be working in that field, and I would be also curious to hear what Donald and Ivo might think in that domain.
Thank you very much, Eva. Indeed, I'm particularly familiar with the AIDAs. Eva and I work together on a podcast on this topic. Perhaps we should get some of these innovators from the Cleantech for Europe involved on that as well, hopefully for the future, to expand the conversation and move it forward. I am conscious we are just at the end of our time. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to any more questions. It's, as I say, always a big area. But this is not the end of a conversation, it's just the beginning going forward. So thank you very much to all my panelists and your insight and taking the time today to discuss with us. I'm going to hand over the floor now back to Jules to give his closing remarks. Jules, I hope you have found this conversation as interesting and informative and engaging as I have.
I found it absolutely fascinating, and thank you so much, Jennifer, for taking the time to be with us today, and to have this fantastic moderation. And thank you to all the panelists who really made the time to start that conversation. Maybe just a couple of takeaways, at least on my side. I think just this idea of how that dialogue is sorely needed between clean tech leaders and policymakers. I think, as you say, Jennifer, we kind of laid the first stone for that dialogue today, but obviously this is an effort that should continue, and we'll look to do that. And I think the idea of a group like MEP Maydell is mentioning could be one. The second takeaway for me is that it really looks like the policy is already moving in the right direction, but that indeed both communities want to kind of stay abreast of each other, and communicate with each other to make sure that the laws that are passed and the regulations that are passed kind of go in the right direction. And maybe just to pick up on some of the next topics that you proposed for the next meeting. I think we talked about harmonization of rules, impact measurement, greenwashing, international dimensions, and so these are all topics that we'd really love to get into the for the following conversations. So I think what remains to be said on my end is we're super excited to host the next Cleantech for Europe Summit, and we'll try to have that in early November, and we'll think about all these topics and all the fantastic questions that came through social media to put it together. So thank you, Jennifer, and thank you to all the speakers who made the time today, and wish you a pleasant day. Bye.
Thank you.